Good evening, my friends. Thank you for joining me on Last Days Live. I appreciate you being with me this Monday. A couple things to cover just as we set this thing up for this evening. Busy week for me and my father, my mom. We'll be going to Memphis on Wednesday night, actually. And then on Thursday morning, God willing, my dad will be having surgery on his ankle. Would you please be in prayer about that? Because Dad still has a very effective ministry, preaches 3 times a week, and teaches at the School of Biblical Studies, has a lot to do with taking care of the property at MAP, and we really need him. 80 years old, but they've agreed to do this surgery. I'm excited that maybe it'll give him a little more mobility. If you'd pray for Dad, that would mean a lot to me. All right, Last Days Live, here we are. It's happening right before our eyes. A lot of things that I could share with you. Just before I went live, I was noticing this. Fox News. New York City cops are, quote, declaring war on Mayor de Blasio. The Union says, following an assassination attempts, plural, on officers. Very upset with this Democratic guy, and that is, has anybody else noticed? Hi, Heather. Thanks for joining me this evening. Has anybody else noticed that ever since President Obama, that there's just been kind of this, I don't know what you call it, this violent mentality. Remember when St. Louis was on fire? You remember when, we had various police officers that, were being assassinated, and the president actually getting up and identifying with the thugs who were being shot for pulling a gun on the police officer. You remember that? And now here we are these years later, and even though I believe that our president is trying to bring about a further respect for our country and first responders and all of those kind of things, we got individuals like this Democrat in New York City who is not backing his police force. And so you've got individuals who are Democrats themselves who are just outraged. Because this is the mentality of the Democratic Party. They just go in a nutso direction with their liberal thinking. All the way from socialism to baby sacrifices to homosexuality, which, by the way, is a good segue here in just a moment into what we're going to talk about this evening. Hi, Miss Laura. Thank you for joining me down there in Louisiana. I appreciate you for being here. Heather, she's all the way up there in Indiana, and Miss Laura's down there in Louisiana, and got other folks viewing. We've got folks occasionally tune in from the Philippines, etc. Have no idea what the weather is over there. There's Miss Dixie. She's also down there in Louisiana. Thank you for joining me this evening for Last Days Live. It is happening right before our eyes. It's a mess, isn't it? Well, let's just jump into this one. It's not our topic for this evening. We talked about it last time. Pedal backwards there in my feed, and you'll be able to see it from last week if you desire. I can't pronounce it yet. I've listened on Siri and various things trying to teach you to pronounce this name of this virus. I call it the coronavirus, but that's not what they call it. Coronavirus virus? I don't know, something of that nature. But anyhow, last week I showed you from the statistics that I have been able to glean that there were 361 deaths last week. Well, that's gone up, tripled almost, to 910 deaths worldwide, I am told. You see down there in the bottom right-hand corner where I'm getting my statistics. 40,639 have been sickened worldwide. That's up from last week when it was just around 17,000. 12 confirmed cases within the United States. Last week I think I said 11, but we've had a death. An American citizen has died of this. And then you got that Diamond something cruise line that's parked over there, I think in Japan, that they can't get the folks off, and there's like 130 of them that have been infected, and it's just horrible what's going on with this thing. Again, I don't think even yet that it has rivaled what happens, around this time of year with regards to the common flu, whatever that is. But you're beginning to see how that our immune system is breaking down. You're beginning to see how these kind of things are not just affecting a local area, but now because we're a much smaller world, it takes on a global impact almost immediately, etc. I think all of that's playing into the last days and the fact that we need to be extra concerned about where we are at. Last week, I remember I shared that passage, I think it was from the book of Luke, and it talks about how, pestilences and that kind of thing, that God's used them throughout history, and I don't have any reason to believe that he couldn't use them present tense to bring us into judgment. worldwide judgment for that matter. Anyhow, you see this, the shocking statistics. You see, just comparing to what I reported last week, and you got to shake your head and you got to say, wow, major application here. If we're living in difficult times, I know some people just call me a radical whatever, and so maybe you don't want to go there with me. Maybe you just want to dismiss me as being an alarmist, and that's okay if you want to do that. But at the very least, look at what's happening with regards to this particular situation. You don't want to call it last days, whatever, that's fine, but at least recognize the fact that we have got crises that are happening all around about us, and if our folks are not prepared to go to the other side, and by the way, most folks who think they're going aren't going. The remnant is always much smaller than what folks expect. And so you need to ask yourself, is my family not just attending church 3 times a week? Are they actually passionate about getting involved and leading? We seem to be just perfectly content to raise children who, they go to church at least once a week, and so therefore, I must have done a good job. No! If you want to really tie into being a good parent, raise some children who are going to make sacrifices to the Lord, go into leadership positions with regards to the church and that kind of a thing. Because those are the folks who are going. We need to remember, as I said too many times already, I know, but the remnant is always much smaller than people expect, and so you need to do double time to make sure that if this kind of thing affects your family, what if next week I'm sitting in this same chair and I report that not only has that, statistic tripled, but now we've got a major epidemic happening in the United States, and it's affected your family. And your child is laying in the room next Monday night when I do this thing, and they are struggling to stay alive. Would you be able to take any comfort in knowing that you've done your best as a parent, you prepared them? Maybe they're 17 years old. Have they yet confessed their loyalty to the Lord? Maybe they're 23 years old. Have they gotten involved in a family now and they've gone off and they're no longer faithful to the Lord? We've got to really, I think, be sober about where we're at in the world today and all the threats that are coming on us from various places. All right, well, that's not really the topic I want to talk about tonight because of that, but if that one didn't get you, hopefully, surely this one will. I can't pronounce this guy, just like I can't pronounce the coronavirus, whatever that's called. This Pete Buttigieg, something like that. Anyhow, this is the guy who won the Iowa caucuses. He's a homosexual, and he is competing to be the next president of the United States. And there he's kissing his, I think the other guy's supposed to be the wife. I don't remember how that works. And it's rather interesting in the homosexual community that they're so opposed to identifying the separate genders are what go together, and yet they often will use the terms. One of them will be designated as the husband, and one of them will be designated as the wife. And it's an oddity, at least for me, growing up in a culture, at least in the past, where it was pretty clear a woman was a woman and a man was a man, and those two things go together. But you don't put two men together because logic tells me that two men can't have a baby, and because they can't have a baby, then it seems to me that that's kind of anti-cultural development, But anyhow, that's just my sideline on that. But this Pete Buttigieg, he's on track, folks, and doing well in New Hampshire, I'm told. And so tomorrow, we may come out of this thing tomorrow and find out that this Pete Buttigieg guy, he is going to actually, have some real credibility and steam behind him. But the thing about this guy that ought to be most concerning to you and I is that he quotes Scripture, and does it quite well, actually. He's a pretty good orator. He's able to present himself quite well. Good-looking fella, all of those kind of things. And so he's able to present his case. And because we have dumbed down the discussion of biblical authority, we've allowed our children to think that it's okay just to attend a couple times, throughout the month, church services, that is. We have spent the majority of their growing up years repeating over and over again the stories of Noah and Abraham and Moses without really getting them into anything deep about those men, because we've not had a good educational program at church, but more importantly, because we are willing to ship our children off into the world for their education. And the government system has slowly deteriorated the foundations of the biblical authority. Because of that, we are now in this position where we've got a homosexual who is he's a viable candidate. This guy could be in the White House next time this year. Can you imagine? What are we going to do about that? And what are some applications we should draw from it? Well, before I get there, let me go to this passage. You've seen it before with regards to our homosexuality, but let me just say that I have debated over the years many homosexuals, homosexual pastors. I've written on this particular subject, etc. And one of the things I have noticed that this is the passage, if you want to deal with homosexuality, this is the passage that you really ought to start with, because the other passages, they are able to twist and turn into a pretzel, and they are able to dilute the meaning of those passages. But if you go with Romans chapter 1, it's really hard to get past what he is saying in this passage. Not only that, but that he is condemning a cultural trend. For instance, if you start with Sodom and Gomorrah, one of their first arguments is going to be that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was not really homosexuality, it was a lack of hospitality. And actually, that's true. There was a lack of hospitality that was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. But if you read it in its in depth, you've got these men banging down the door of Lot's house trying to get to him so they can have sex with the angels. You know, how perverted is that? But it could happen in America. Trust me, it could happen in America. But you go there and they're able to just kind of circumvent that. And they're going to do the dance, you know. But if you go to Romans chapter 1, it's just really hard to dance around this chapter. In Romans chapter 1, he's talking about a culture that collapses. This could be headlines from today's newspaper. He says, and you'll notice that I wasn't able to get the whole text up there, and so I encourage you, because I'm not trying to hide anything from you. I'm just trying to get you the context here, but I'd like you to read Romans chapter 1, the entire chapter. Let me know what you think. I'd be happy to talk to you online about this subject matter. But notice what it says in this compilation of verses that I've got here. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Powerful statement. Isn't that the way that we are today? You know, finally man has gotten to a point where we no longer need that crutch called religion. You know, we've moved beyond God. Or if we don't say that, then we interpret God through what man thinks. It's one of my bigger concerns with regards to some of our young men going off to graduate schools. It seems like that they're coming out the other side having a real lack of appreciation for biblical authority, because they're now feeling that they can interpret God through man's understanding of who God is, rather than allowing God to interpret himself. But that's not really the point of tonight. So they became fools. They claim to be wise, but really they're fools. We're studying on Wednesday night, we're studying the book of 1 Corinthians. You need to join me as we study the book of 1 Corinthians. And then on Sunday night, we're studying authority. Those are also live things. But I've been studying out this idea of how God uses that which is foolish, the preaching, using that which is foolish to confound the wise, that it is a stumbling block to the Jew, etc. That God here has taken folks who think they're big and bad and smart, and he's made them look like fools. Continue on. Therefore, because of this arrogance, therefore God gave them over. Now you notice I got that underlined. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. He gave them over in their sinful degrading of their bodies with one another. Now again, other passages, the homosexual community can kind of circumvent that, and they can reason around, and they can try to twist themselves in a pretzel to get past it. But it's hard to get past this one because it's just pretty blunt. He gave them over in the sinful degradings of their bodies with one another. Well, what does that exactly mean? It could mean a lot of things. There's a lot of kind of sexual perversion that goes on. It doesn't necessarily have to mean homosexuality. Well, what does the Bible say? They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, number one. The truth of God, that I created you in a certain fashion because this fashion works, and I want it to be the undergirdings of what a family looks like. Okay? But they deny that. Because of this, because they denied the truth of God, God gave them over to shameful lusts. What are those lusts? Well, the Bible completely identifies that. Men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lusts for one another. It's hard to get past the fact that this is talking about homosexuality. Notice also it says men also. The reason it says also there is because of the ... ahead of that, which I wasn't able to get on the screen, and that is he already addressed women. So when women are inflamed with lust for women, it don't work as far as God is concerned. When men are inflamed with lust for men, it don't work as far as God is concerned. Romans chapter 1 clearly is talking about homosexuality, and it's clearly talking about a system that does not work. Okay? Now we're going to get back to this Pete Buttigieg guy here in just a second, but I just want you to see, because you always start with Bible. Start with Bible and let the Bible interpret the Bible, and at the end of the process, you're going to have Bible. Start with Bible and let man interpret the Bible, and at the end of the process, you're going to have some kind of screwed up mess that's where man has decided he's going to, this passage means that, or you can dismiss it because that's just culturally, antiquated, or whatever. You got to be careful. Start with Bible, let the Bible, unless God himself says that particular command is no longer applicable, you make sure that you apply it in your life, because only God can change God's commands. I get weary with these preachers who think that they can go around just to selecting, this is a command that we should do, this is not one, because that particular command, that's culturally related, and that doesn't apply to us anymore. Unless God says it's culturally related, you got to obey it, okay? It's got to be. I'm weary with those who would claim that, we need to just get back to emphasizing just the stuff that has to do with salvation. If it's a salvation issue, then that's worthy for you and I to really debate and discuss. But if it's not a salvation issue, let's just move on. The reason that discourages me is because it limits, at least in their mind it seems, it limits what is a salvation issue. Listen to me. Salvation issue doesn't just have to do with baptism. A salvation issue is when you are in rebellion against a command of God, whatever that command happens to be. That's a salvation issue. And when you don't apply the command itself specifically, because you're circumventing it, thinking that man's wise and man can come up with this idea, well, that's just cultural, and so we don't have to do that no more, you're really in danger of standing against God. Now let's come back to our text. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust. Men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. The context clearly is about homosexuality, and he's saying in this passage that God gave them over twice. But I want you to see this as I connect it to another passage. Let me take that off the screen and show you this one. Same passage, and then at the bottom I've given you a second passage. Top passage is the Romans 1. Twice it says that God gave them over. Notice 2 Thessalonians. This scares me. It really scares me for a lot of my friends. God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth. If you read the context, and again I didn't have enough screen to put it all there, but I beg of you to go and read it for yourself. He's talking about the coming of the lawless one. Who is the lawless one? There's a lot of end times preachers who like to, they like to surmise, and they like to say it's this one, it's that one, it's the other one, but honestly, they don't know. The lawless one, connection with, the Antichrist, all of that end time stuff. We get off on that, and so some of us get so hairy that we think to ourselves, the cobweb's so thick, I don't even want to talk about it, so we walk away from it, and that's very unhealthy. Even though I may not be able to give you a specific name with regards to the lawless one, in context, he gives us things that we can understand about the lawless one. And we're going to understand that in context, he's dealing with individuals who have deluded themselves in a sense because they hate or they don't follow the truth. What they do is they want the truth to say what they want the truth to say. And so instead of starting with God, they start with their viewpoint of the truth. And so let me give you an example. Ephesians, I use this probably more than folks are comfortable with, but that's okay. Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5 clearly teaches that older women are to teach younger women specifically how to be homemakers. Love their husbands, love their children, be homemakers, etc. Okay? A lot of preachers today are saying to themselves, or they're saying to their audiences, they're saying, well, I'm uncomfortable with that because if I preach it that way, there's going to be folks in my audience who aren't going to like it. Too bad. That's not your job, preacher. That's not your job, elder. Your job is to preach what the book says. Others try to circumvent it, and they'll say, not just that it makes folks mad, but they'll say to themselves, well, that's just cultural. And one of the ones that they like to use that is so unfortunate is they like to go down further in the context, and they say, well, you see, further in the context, it talks about if you have servants, if you have slaves, and we don't have those today, so clearly the rest of the passage has to be thrown out because we don't have servants in our household today. No, you don't throw the rest of the passage. If you have servants, and then, by the way, many folks in the world today do, if you have servants, then that passage applies to you. If you don't have servants, then obviously it doesn't apply to you because you don't have servants. But if you got a wife, see how it doesn't even apply to the single man. Titus 2, 3 through 5 has nothing to do with the single man. But if you got a wife, it applies. If there's an elderly woman living in your context, it applies. You can't remove it just because it's cultural in nature. God never removed it. God never gave a command for women to exhaust their efforts in a career outside the home. He never gave us that command, but he did command women to make sure they exhaust themselves by becoming homemakers. And so that means, obviously, Sonny, you're saying to yourself that if a woman works outside the home, she's going to hell. I did not say that. What I said was that the context says that a woman must put her predominant emphasis on being familial, part of the family. And you can only, I think by implication, you can only then expand that outside the home once you've taken care of your home. We've got generations now of women who have lost their children to the world, and yet they continue to argue, but it's okay, it's no impact. I can still spend the majority of my waking hours away from the home and raise my family at the same time. If that's true, you would think that our culture would be an amazing culture, and it ain't. It's a culture in chaos. But the thing I want you to see from these two verses is so alarming to me. Notice in Romans 1, twice it says, he gave them over. And then in 2 Thessalonians 2, it says, God sends them a powerful delusion. These two passages are talking about a point in time when God gives up on a people. Think about that. He gave them over. He gave them over. He sends a delusion so that they'll believe a lie. God can get so disgusted with the people that he literally brings the delusion upon them because they've proven that they're unwilling. Maybe a good example is Pharaoh. You remember the first several plagues? And Pharaoh, it says, Pharaoh's the one who chooses to harden his heart. But after several plagues, God says enough. And God begins to harden his heart. You know why? Because you can get to a point in rebellion that God gives up on you because you have proven yourself to live in a system of rebellion against him. That scares me. It scares me for a lot of my friends because I've got a lot of my friends who feel like that they're just okay. They're part of the folks that are going to be going when the Lord comes back, and they're just content with who they are. But in their process of reasoning, these are folks who compromise daily on what the book actually says because they want it to say what they want it to say rather than surrendering to what it actually says. I'm really concerned that some of what's happening in these passages, especially the second one, 2 Thessalonians, this is not just the extreme perverts of our world. That might apply to Romans 1, but I don't think it applies to 2 Thessalonians because if you read it in context, he's going to say that in 2 Thessalonians that the reason the delusion comes that they'll believe a lie is just simply because they didn't love the truth. He says in this, what I have up there, they didn't believe the truth, but pedal backwards, it says they didn't love the truth. And so what do they love? They loved a form of the truth that made them feel good, and so they interpreted God through their own desires. I know a lot of folks like that. I'm really concerned for those people. They think they're going to be part of the remnant. And all along they have been deluded, not just by the fact that they have tried to twist truth into what they want it to be, but because God then gave up on them. Their rebellious nature. And God, I think you can go to church 3 times a week. You can be a church leader for that matter. And if you've got that attitude described in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 11 and 12 and around that context, if you've got that attitude, I think that you could easily be just like them. And I'm concerned for some of my friends that they are now, and I watch them as I reason with them. Their reasoning is just nonsensical. You can tell from the opening volley. Their reasoning is just to defend their way of life, their point of view. They want to defend their gluttonous materialism. They want to defend their pursuit of a career. They want to defend, the fact that their children are more enamored with shooting a free throw than they are with going to church on Wednesday night. They want to defend all of that because they want to keep their comfort. They don't want to be convicted by Scripture. And so in the process, they make truth what they want it to be. That Titus 2 passage, I think, is a prime example. Because there's so many women who want to have a career outside the home, they twist that passage to make it say what makes them comfortable, rather than just letting God speak. Well, let's draw a few applications from this before we shut down this evening. Yeah, Cindy, as I was putting this together just earlier, she said, Sonny, that is a gross picture. And I agree with her. It's just, ugh. But here are some applications that we need to make in order to change this scenario. Number one, I think that we need to recognize, and we've got to hurriedly repent of the fact that it is our compromise of biblical authority that creates this. for years. I used to travel regularly out to San Francisco and other places in the West, and for years I have debated homosexual pastors on this particular subject. And what they do is they approach the subject not from what the Bible says, but I have a relationship that I want to maintain, and so how can I make the Bible validate my relationship? And so they begin to take passages such as the condemnation of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they say that's not really talking about homosexuality. That's actually just talking about a poor level of hospitality. I even had one homosexual pastor tell me that what was being condemned in that passage is not homosexuality, but perverted homosexuality. In other words, homosexuality that two men who are married, but they're not they're not faithful to their relationship vows. That's what he told me. We are compromising, diluting, so that we can ingratiate ourselves to the community. We're compromising biblical authority. And it's leading us to this situation where we now have a homosexual who could easily, by this time next year, he could be our next president. Second of all, it's not just our compromise of biblical authority, but the breakdown of roles within the home inspires this. One of the reasons our little boys are growing up thinking that they might be girls, one of the reasons our little boys are growing up being more attracted to other boys than they are to women is because of what happens in the home. When you have a strong role model within the home, a man who's by God's definition a man, a woman who is by God's definition a woman, then they're able to process, and the reasoning comes together more correctly. But when you've got a dad who looks more like the roles that the Bible would suggest are given to a woman, and you got a mom who's more enamored with the roles that the Bible would suggest are more developed by the man, you see how it just gets all jumbled and confused. And so the little boy grows up and he doesn't know what he's supposed to be. The same thing obviously can happen to the little girls. Men need to be men and women need to be women according to what the Bible says. Forget Sonny Childs, forget my opinion, forget cultural pressures, forget religion. What does the Bible say that a man should look like? What does the Bible say that a woman should look like? Get back to that, and our little boys and our little girls will begin growing up recognizing their role within the home. But when mama goes away and spends the majority of her waking hours away in a career, you know what that does to the little girl? You know what that does to the little boy? When a daddy is not the provider of the home, a daddy is not the chief disciplinarian, or maybe I should say more importantly, when the daddy is not the spiritual leader of his home, you know what that does to the little boy. You know what that does to the little girl. And so the breakdown of roles within the home inspires this perversion. Then number 3, letting the world educate our children sustains this situation. Compromising biblical authority creates it. The breakdown of roles within the home inspires it. And then letting the world educate our children for 50% of their waking hours during the school week, that sustains it. Because trust me, this is an environment in our world today where we want to make sure that everybody feels good about themselves. And if they choose that they want to be transgender, then we need to let them feel good about themselves. And we put them into the secular context. These are Christian parents putting them into the secular context where the teachers are not allowed to introduce the biblical authority with regards to transgenderism or with regards to homosexuality or abortion. We're not allowed to go there, not allowed to do that. And so we put them for 50% of their waking hours into this vacuum of God's moral demands. How can we expect anything else than this kind of thing to happen? So I conclude by saying, folks, we did this. And it's time for Christian parents to repent. It's time for Christian church leaders to repent. It's time for us to step up, as I've said repeatedly, grow a backbone, and be willing to say that which might be culturally unacceptable. Or it might not ingratiate yourself to the community. Or it might stir some people up. It might make somebody in the church mad. But if it's truth, it's truth. We've got to stop allowing truth to be defined by what we want truth to be, because if we don't stop this, I believe that 2 Thessalonians passage is going to apply to us, and that is that you and I are going to fall under a great delusion where we will believe the lie. And there's many of my preacher buddies right now who are fudging on this subject of homosexuality. And they're looking at it differently, and they're saying, well, maybe. No, there is no maybe. Read Romans 1, please. As I told you last week, we've sent out this letter. If you haven't received it yet, it's probably because you're not on our mail list. And so if you would, please message me privately so that the whole world doesn't get it. Message me privately your postal address so that I can send you this letter. At the front, the first part of that letter, it lists all the various things. I speak 7 times every week. And I'd love to have you join me on those. At 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, we do a Bible class from the book of Acts. 8:30, we do a sermon. We're talking about the overseeing of the overseer. Is there any accountability for elders? At 5 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, we're talking about biblical authority. At Monday morning at 10 o'clock, we do Monday Morning Live, which is kind of a silly time. We talk about hope and godly giggles. At 8 o'clock on Monday nights, right now, we talk about Last Days Live. Wednesday night, we talk about 1 Corinthians, a verse-by-verse study. And then on Sunday morning, about 10:30, I speak to our home church on various topics. And specifically right now, we're in a series about home churches, which, by the way, I have given 14 different lessons on home church and the biblical basis for that. If you're interested in that, I'll send you a pen drive that you can put it on your own computer, or better yet, go to sonnychilds.com, myname.com, top right-hand corner, and you can find the audio and video links there that can take you to some of those series. There's 3 of them. The first series is on the underground church, America's underground church. The second series is on the home reality. There's 6 of those. Home church reality. And then the third series is on home church accountability. And anyhow, you get that. Right now, I'm into a different series, though, on Lord's Day Live with regards to overseeing the overseer, and can we do that, anyhow? And yes, thank you, Dorothy. And she always reminds me, it's Central Time. All of those are Central Time, so you can join me and be a part of that. But anyhow, back to the letter. If you didn't get that letter, please send me your address so that I can send it to you, so you can be on my mail list and you can be praying for us, etc., etc. That would mean the world to me. We've lost a lot of support, as you can imagine. And a lot of folks, they're not very happy. I had a guy today, I was out and about. He said, "Are you Sonny Childs?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he shook my hand and he said, "I follow you on Facebook." Well, I'm telling you what, when somebody says that to me, I just cringe because I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go. And I thought to myself, here I am in the middle of this public scenario, and he's going to want to debate various stuff. But he didn't. He said, "Man," he said, "I want you to understand something." He said, "I appreciate you. Thank you for saying what you're saying." Well, I told him, I said, "I'll live off of that all day long because you're part of the minority. Most folks aren't saying that." I'm getting a lot of hate mail about, whatever, people withdrawing their support, all of those kind of things. Most folks aren't saying, "Way to go, Sonny, get after the biblical perspective of the home," etc., etc. I need you. And some of those watching, I see you over there. I see the long list of folks who are watching me this evening. Thank you for being such an encouragement to Cindy and I. Oh, we love you. Please give us your address so that we can send you our newsletter every once in a while. And then lastly, there's our YouTube channel. But I want you to see that last line there. Interested in our free e-newsletter? Just send it out this week. We've begun at the first of the year. We've begun every month. We hope to send out an e-newsletter. But this is all it is. It's just a list of all of those times that I have done a live broadcast that have been recorded and are now put on podbean.com. You see that one in yellow there. And they're up there. And all you got to do in this newsletter then is you go down there and you see a link. It gives you a little blurb as to what that particular video is about. And you say, I'd like to watch that. And you hit that little link. It'll take you to the Podbean thing. And boom, there you go. And you can also use these, at your little home church gatherings. If you've got small groups that are happening. I've got one congregation, they get together every Sunday morning and they put these things right up on the big screen and they watch them, and I am their preacher that Sunday morning. And by the way, I love these folks because they support me as if I was there every Sunday morning. Man, your congregation, would you like something like that? That would mean all the world to my ministry. You can take these things, put them up there. The Lord's Day Live is designed to be a Bible class and a Sunday morning sermon kind of a scenario. Well, if you do that, that would mean the world to me. And these folks, in Kentucky, and they support me just like I'm their regular preacher. And you don't know how that's helped us survive over the last several months when we've had a lot of difficulties. But anyhow, do you want that e-newsletter? If you do, then send me your email address, okay? And by the way, it's a lot cheaper on us, obviously, to send you that because it doesn't require a stamp. Oh, what else we got? I think we're down to our last slide. Maybe not. Nope, you already saw that one, did you? There it is. So, in conclusion, keep your eyes on the skies because he's coming. And so, these 4 things as I end every time. Keep your family close. Keep your homemaker vigilant. That means getting after the protection of the home. Keep watch on the conditions around about you, because I'm telling you, it's just rapidly unwinding. And keep your investments in heaven, because even if the coronavirus or whatever it's called comes to your house, as long as your children and your family are part of the remnant of God, it'll hurt for a moment, but soon we're going to be with them. You know what I'm saying? So keep your investments in heaven. Even if we wake up this time next year and we got a homosexual in the White House, folks, we can survive this because our investments are in heaven, right? And so keep your investments in heaven. I love you. Thank you so much for being with me. I am grateful. Sonny Childs, till next time, be there. Matthew 16:26.